It's been hot as hell out there, but fortunately so have the latest metal releases.
You're a brutal master of darkness and hatred, so while you're out there enjoying your frozen dairy dessert, you need to hit the streets and disrespect some organized religion while you're at it.
These are my favorite metal albums of August 2024, and we're starting with Spectral Wound with Songs of Blood and Mire. A pretty anticipated release from the black metal fans in my audience based on some of the comments leading up to it. This fourth album is another pure and unfiltered blast of the genre from the Montreal band, and while I've largely tired of the endless waves of dissection-inspired groups, doing it this well earns you a pass. It's somehow as gorgeous as it is grim. Across the board, these performances are so captivating, aided even more by some pretty tight songwriting from beginning to end. Up there with Blackbraid last year, these soaring melodies and infectious beats will absolutely get under your skin. Next up we have Fulci with Duck-Faced Killings. The Italian Giallo horror-obsessed death metalers are back, this time paying homage to the batshit insane film The New York Ripper. More just classic 90s old-school flavor in the vein of other gore-soaked bands like Mortician, but I also appreciate the occasional added flair of tracks like A Blade in the Dark, which is a very accurate portrayal of the music used in the films of this era. Now that said, this is definitely lower on the end of this month's favorites, as in essence it's mostly just a lot of the same, and I'll also say that the hip-hop infused left turn of Knife feels incredibly out of place. Still a fun album for horror fans and a great lead up to the coming fall season.
That's me, Lieutenant Williams.
Speaking, what do you want?
To dedicate a murder to you.
Then we have Oxygen Destroyer with Guardian of the Universe. This Seattle Kaiju-inspired band brings the most craterous elements of death metal, black metal, and thrash metal, but overall I'd say they lean most heavily into the latter. Regardless, this is some insanely destructive music that fully lives up to the Gamera carnage of the cover art. Not much to say as the premise is fairly simple: blast beats, blackened snarls, blazing riffage. Highly recommended to fans of everything from Morbid Saint and Demolition Hammer to Vader and Hellripper. Best to just experience it for yourself. Then we have Teeth with The Will of Hate. This LA death metal band reminds me of a more brutal version of Meshuggah. Lots of groove and even similar atmosphere with the jazzy solos, but then more of an immolation death growl and punishing crunch to the guitar, and also some doom elements thrown in for good measure. Pretty consistent runtime as a whole, but I'm partial to Writhe and Realm, another really strong example of the pacing I look for in something a little death doomy. Then we have Wintersun with Time 2. Well, over a decade since part 1 and $500,000 later, and it's finally here. I've enjoyed Yari's work with early Ensephirum and beyond, but for the amount of time and money this took, nothing short of perfection should be expected. And while it's not that by any means, I'd be lying if I said I did not greatly enjoy it anyways. Folk metal is so few and far between these days, and while this is really more of a progressive metal album, those shredding guitars and massive layers of synth atmosphere still scratch the same itch that classics like Ensephirum and Iron did for me so many years ago. Impressive stuff. I still don't think that it warrants the dollar signs attached to it, but hell, it's not my money, so I guess I don't really care. I even got it early, even though I was not part of the Indiegogo. Then we have Blacklist with Murderous Intent. This is the second album from this UK thrash band, mixing more traditional early thrash sounds with the blackened sound of Skeleton Witch and Necropanther. Add songs focused around the spooky like of Alien, Halloween, and The Evil Dead, and this is mostly a match made in heaven for me, especially as we start to transition again into fall. I will say that I vastly prefer the more blackened extreme elements to the cleaner vocals, the latter just kind of annoying me sometimes. Even so, this is well worth checking out for all of the thrash fans, and I hope they can further tighten things up from here. Then we have the return of Ancients with Beyond the Reach of the Sun. 8 years since the Juno-awarded Voice of the Void, and this Canadian progressive metal band finally makes their triumphant return. With both soaring melodies and thunderous heaviness like a giant rumbling through the trees, Ancients is highly recommended to fans of Opeth, Mastodon, and Chemis. From the harsh storm clouds of Despoiled to the jangly Blood Mountain-esque hammer-ons and pull-offs of Cloak of the Vast and Black, this album is really an odyssey. The songwriting lineup may have changed, but these guys have not skipped a beat in delivering a more than worthy follow-up nearly a decade later. Then we have Aphelion with Reaperdawn. The second album from the Swedish and Netherlands project, formed by Necrophobic guitarist and lyricist Sebastian Romstedt. Good mix here of straight blasters and more head bob-inducing mid-pace material, but all with a chilling dark atmosphere centered around cults. Definitely feeling some comparisons to the likes of Watain and at times even Tribulation. Songs could definitely be a bit shorter for what they are, but the guitar work is killer and the vocals cut like a knife. Then we have Monument of Misanthropy with Vile Postmortem Irrumatio. More horror-themed death metal this month, but this time dealing with the real-life horrors of serial killer Ed Kemper. Conceptually, not unlike Macabre's album Dahmer, this record delves into the twisted man's life, but here with an extra fast and heavy approach more akin to Aborted, Benighted, and Cattle Decapitation. Now, the argument could be made that music about events that caused real-life misery can be exploitive and even run the risk of romanticizing the killer, and that's a fair perspective to have. But if all you care about is punching death metal with some technical and melodic twists, you will not be disappointed. Then we have Amiensus with Reclamation Pt II. The Minnesota progressive black and death metal band returns after dropping Part 1 back in April. I already enjoyed the first half, but I think that this conclusion may be even stronger. Once more, I can draw plenty of comparisons to Enslaved, Ishan, and also Borknagar, in that the music is always progressive first and holds back the heavy just enough so that when it hits, it hits. Much like a good horror film, these guys know how to build the suspense to make those torrents of blast beats feel like a true catharsis rather than just offering up cheap jump scares. And the increasingly Gothenburg Melodeath sounding riffs on tracks like Decaying Godchild are fantastic. Then we have Fleshgod Apocalypse with Opera. Another grand entry from my favorite Italian symphonic death metalers. And while I was a little skeptical about this after hearing I Can Never Die as a single, it only gets better from there with bangers like Morphine Waltz, Per Aspera ad Astra, and Pendulum. Ultimately, I think this one takes all of the great lessons learned from the incredible Veleno and translates that into yet another new chapter for their sound. An incredible listen for symphonic fans. Be sure to check out my tier list on all of their albums. Then we have Demiser with Slave to the Scythe. Another tasty dose of black and thrash and speed metal in the vein of Midnight and Hellripper. This is the second album from this South Carolina band, and it is a simple but effective portrayal of black leather-clad rebellion and debauchery. Once more, I will be a little critical at some of these track lengths, as I think these songs would be much more effective at closer to the 3-minute mark. But even so, if you just want to bang your head, throw your horns in the air, and maybe brand an upside-down cross on your forehead, this is what you've been looking for. Then we have Nile with The Underworld Awaits Us All. Another banger of a release from the kings of Egyptian-themed death metal, and another perfect balance between insane technicality and infectious, ancient-sounding melodies. Love that we can get both epic longer tracks and some under 2 minutes that go just as hard as with To Strike with Secret Fang. Great opening with the first two tracks, absolutely nuts, crazy bass and raging thrash energy on Nakata 2, love the eerie backing vocals on Overlords of the Black Earth and Under the Curse of the One God. So many great songs for a record I would put in the upper tiers of their discography, another one you can check out my rankings for right here on the channel. Then we have Vile Rites with Senescence. The debut full-length album from this Portland, Oregon progressive death metal band, and man, are they coming in hot with this one. More examples of songs on the longer side, but from people who actually know how to make every second count. They'll take you on some serious twists and turns, and just when you think it's over, they'll hit you with the best part yet. Great masters of pacing too, with some seriously aggressive fast parts as well as some more methodical death do me fair, even a little gore guts in there at times. And all is with a supreme harnessing of groove acting as the glue that holds it all together. Then we have A Night in Texas with Digital Apocalypse. Funny name for a band from Australia, but I have to wonder if it's a play on deathcore progenitor's Job for a Cowboy. Regardless, this continues the sudden surge of banger releases for the genre after things being quite slow in the first half of the year. Insane riffing and ear-splitting vocals really put on the stank face for me all the way through. Now, to be fair, as excellent as these techie riffs are, I started to feel like they kind of just wrote the same song 10 times. Even so, that song is so good that I don't really mind all that much from a caveman standpoint. Then we have Deceased with Children of the Morgue. Even when considering the early formative albums of the 80s, I have a hard time calling this 11th album from this Virginia band death metal. There's so much more here on the thrash, speed metal, even crust spectrum, but labels aside, on that front, it cooks pretty well. It's another fun, pretty retro-feeling album that managed to get me bobbing my head and tapping my foot several times over. Some really infectious moments on eerie wavelengths and The Gravedigger, but especially with several tracks crossing the 7 and 8 minute mark, it can also drag at times. Then we have Oceano with Living Chaos. Despite being from the county I grew up in, I never really got into Oceano. But this 6th record is quickly turning me into a fan with its union of high-impact caveman deathcore with more melodic and earworm hooks a la some of my other favorites. Tracks like Mass Produced in particular really bring the pain with that disgusting bass tone, ominous riffing, and killer solo. Also love the drift of the surprisingly blissful Darkness Rising and more technical flair of The Price of Pain. And the electronic elements and general groove on Wounds Never Healed gives me strong Brand of Sacrifice and Born of Osiris energy, which is always a plus for me. Next up is Zeal and Ardor with Grief. Recommendation with some caveats on this one. I've been following this project since the very unique inception of the Devil Is Fine EP, and I believe I listed Stranger Fruit as my favorite album of 2018. Since then though, while I've still enjoyed the material, it seemed to be lacking the same refreshing spark that enthralled me to begin with. Grief is a bit of a mixed bag in that respect. There are tracks that I think represent an exciting path forward like Killanova, Thrill, Sugarcoat, and Clawing Out. These show the band innovating and broadening out both the vocal performance and instrumentation in a way that reminds me of Mike Patton's work with Tomahawk. But then there are others like Fend You Off and Hide and Shade that, aside from some earworm melodies and Manuel's always powerful voice, just strike me as lesser recycled versions of old ideas. Worth a listen, but ultimately I'm really hoping this leads to another Grand Slam next time. Then we have Dark Tranquility with End Time Signals. Full disclosure, this is one of my favorite bands of all time, so I'm pretty biased when it comes to anything they put out. I'll admit that this was far from one of my favorite of their albums, and you can check out the tier list I did again to see where it landed, but with bangers like The Last Imagination, Enforced Perspective, and Unforgivable, there's still plenty to enjoy here. Also digging the softer side of others like Neuronal Fire. Solid melodic death metal from one of the best bands in the genre, and still way better than most of what In Flames has been up to, if you ask me. Then we have Nails with Every Bridge Burning. The California grindcore crew are back with their 4th album, and given the 8-year wait, expectations were high. Fortunately, these songs are every bit as aggressive as those on You Will Never Be One of Us, and with Kurt Ballew's production, they sound more explosive than ever. You've got balls to the wall D-beat ragers like Give Me the Painkiller, but also plotting hypnotic chuggers like No More Rivers to Cross, and lacking the ability to process empathy. I'm honestly not the biggest grindcore guy, but I put Nails right up there with Napalm Death and Pig Destroyer when I just want something to break stuff to. Absolute demolition. Before I get to my last pick, just a reminder, if you're enjoying the video, to hit the like button, share your own favorites of the year. Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? And also remember, there is a Metal Trenches merch store where you can get an awesome shirt just like this one or some other things. There is a link in the description. Sometimes YouTube also shows like a little store area too. I always recommend get one size up from what you usually do. But that said, some people might be mad to see this over some of the other picks, but my favorite metal album of August goes to Within the Ruins with Phenomena 2.
This isn't vengeance, this is punishment. Renewal of the know me well.
Making a sequel to one of your most beloved albums is a tall order, especially with a different lineup. But leave it to one of the most underrated bands in the genre to pull it off, delivering even more comic-inspired bangers while also showing the world that gent and deathcore don't need to be generic binary riffs and breakdown fests. This is another masterful union of impressive technicality with highly infectious songwriting. Seriously, with riffs like these, I do not understand why these guys aren't as big as the likes of Periphery. Even the instrumentals are playlist worthy. 7 albums in and not a dud among them, this potentially being among their best. Check out the discography tier list I did a couple years ago to hear more on my thoughts on their past records too. Please go listen to them. Y'all check out this playlist for more of my favorite metal albums of the year by month, or this for your personal YouTube recommendation. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.